All right, let's talk about the Las Vegas Raiders, who had a very unique draft, a good draft, I would say. There were a couple of picks I didn't love. There were a couple of picks I did love. And really, it's the top two picks that were my favorite. Which, hey, a lot of important stuff goes on after day one and day two of the draft. And usually that's the stuff people don't pay a ton of attention to, which is part of why these videos are always, I think, helpful for me, because it forces me to pay attention to this stuff and kind of lets me know where some of these teams are at heading into the next season. But at the same time, the most important picks you're going to make are going to be your top two picks, not screwing these up. And I know that the Raiders wanted, I think there was some thoughts that they wanted a quarterback. I felt like they were going to consider a quarterback, and there were even some reports they kind of considered maybe trading up for a quarterback. Decided to stick where they were at. Again, maybe if the price was right, they would have gone up and got Penix. Maybe they thought Penix was going to fall and didn't expect Atlanta to draft him. But Brock Bowers is no consolation prize. He's just a prize, right? I mean, getting a guy like this, set up the board. What you see next to me is, number 2 to left. That is when the player was drafted. The next number over is when they were projected to be drafted. Then the player name and the position they play. Bowers was projected to go 7th. You got him at 13. You feel good about that whatsoever. You have the 13th overall pick. You wanted to get a star player. They got someone with star potential. I think some people are going to be kind of a bit turned off by the tight end position in the sense of, like, it's true that tight ends don't have the highest hit rate compared to other positions. It's also true that Kyle Pitts was recently drafted and he was supposed to be this hyped up prospect. And I think Kyle Pitts really hurt Bowers' stock, to be honest. I think people are kind of a little bit scared by, like, wait, Kyle Pitts was drafted 4th in a great draft, and you look at this like, okay, forget that. I let's just go with a different position. But listen, Brock Bowers is not Kyle Pitts, and for what it's worth, I had a higher grade on Brock Bowers than Kyle Pitts, and Kyle Pitts is still good. Like, I feel like people act like he's a bum. Like, guy had 1,000 yards in a season. Like, you try to play in an Arthur Smith offense. It's not, he's not, he hasn't lived up to the hype, but he's still a good player. So Brock Bowers does a lot of different things. Really good player. I made a film study on him. Check that out if you want. And I made a film study on Jackson Powers Johnson. That was a night of film study. He was 17 on my board. He was 30th on the consensus big board, and he goes 44. I put guard there because I think he's going to play guard. They have a center, and they apparently, told the center, hey, you're going to play center. We're, Powers Johnson, we're going to try out at guard. Interesting. It was kind of weird where Barton, it was like Graham Barton or Jackson Powers Johnson. And a lot of people said, like, well, they're kind of similar prospects, but we've seen Powers Johnson play center last year. Barton played it earlier, but, not his most recent year. So it's like, that's kind of advantage Jackson Powers Johnson. Well, it turns out Barton's the one playing center and Powers Johnson isn't. Powers Johnson's going to play guard, interestingly enough. I think he'll be a really strong player, though. And even if it's not a perfect fit, sometimes just get the best player that you can still play. I always feel like the way I view it is, who's the best player on the board? Okay, will he play for us? If the answer is yes, let's just draft that guy. I think teams overthink it with need too much. And I think, they could use a guard for sure. So that works out. Those were really strong. We then do have a couple of, what are reaches on the consensus big board, which, if whether you care about that or not, I do care about it personally. Usually when a guy is drafted in the 70s who was projected to go into 150s, he plays more like a guy who was supposed to go in 150s than in the 70s. Not always, though. So Delmar Glaze is the selection who, so he's interesting. So he's an offensive lineman out of Maryland who doesn't have the best analytics, doesn't have the best tape, but what he does have is a really good pass blocking analytics and pass blocking tape. His run blocking needs a ton of work, but if you're looking for a guy at pick 77 who can maybe be a depth piece who can pass block, he's your guy. Is it a bit of a reach for me personally? Yes, it is, but, okay. I don't think they got an invaluable piece, is what I'll say. Sometimes you see these, got teams draft players at 77. I'm like, I'm not even sure if that guy's going to play. Glaze can play. Glaze has value. It's just, I think it was a bit of a reach for me personally, but I understand the logic for sure. Then we get to a bit of a surprise. So, Demicarian Richardson, the corner who was projected to go undrafted, his 300th, on the consensus big board. There aren't 300 draft picks. So, yeah, that's going to turn some people off of this selection. Has really good size, though. I'll say that. and maybe you feel like some of the issues are coachable. I haven't, done a deep dive on all of these kind of later picks, so it's a lot of reading what other people say and giving, my thoughts on that. So, I think that what people like is he has some good speed, and he's he's 6'2", so you have the speed and the size. He's definitely a developmental prospect. So when I read about him, I'm kind of like, oh yeah, well sure, it makes sense to get him. But 300 might just be a bit rich for some people, which is why I think that many people will criticize this pick, and even myself, with the information I know now, I have no choice but to kind of say, yeah, this feels like a weird selection. But again, teams make weird selections that work out all the time. Next up, we have Tommy Eichenberg, the linebacker. So he's an interesting player in that I really think for him, what you're probably looking at is more of a, I think a third linebacker is probably the best placement for him. He doesn't have the elite physical traits that you usually look for out of a linebacker, and also isn't exactly Ray Lewis when it comes to instincts. Steph definitely is kind of a bit of a straight line player. But that being said, again, there is value in a guy who's just going to do a good job at stopping the run when it comes in his area, play that stuff well. I don't think he's ever going to be a superstar level player, but can he be a consistent role player? Sure. And so for pick 148, I have no real issue with that. In fact, that's probably a strength. Then Dylan Laube, not exactly sure how to say his name, but maybe I'll have to learn, because I could see him being a good potential third down back for the Raiders, who obviously they lost Josh Jacobs. So, I don't think he's going to be Josh Jacobs, but I think that he could be someone who feels like, the route running was good enough that some people were even wondering, could he be a slot receiver, which is interesting. And hey, that adds versatility, right? If you can do multiple different things, well, then people are going to want to draft you in the 200s, because, they like getting guys who can, if someone gets hurt, if you're not, in 200s, if maybe you're just a special teams guy, well, you also can play, running back, and you can play, halfback. Well, that gives you just an extra hat to wear as a backup for different positions, and you're more likely to, get a roster spot, because it can save a roster spot. You don't need backups at both of those positions. So that's good. Then you have a couple guys that, again, anytime there's defensive backs this late, you do wonder how much of that it is just going to be are you just drafting special teamers at this point? Maybe. I don't know. It's interesting. I do think people have talked about Trey Taylor as a guy who, listed as safety here. Maybe it could be a corner as well, but probably a safety who is, maybe can work as a guy who, I don't think that people feel like he could really be a man coverage safety guy, someone who kind of has to be back there pretty significantly, kind of just in a zone scheme where he doesn't have to do a lot of different things. So again, I'm expecting more of a special teams guy who could also be depth in a secondary, and same thing with MJ Devonshire, who feels like another guy who, listen, an interesting situation where he's 5'11", but actually has a pretty big wingspan, so the arm length is very good. But yeah, another guy who I don't think is, not the elite athlete or anything like that. So I do wonder if you're feeling special teams there as well. But yeah, as a whole, I would say a good draft here by the Raiders. Well done, I think, to be able to get some really good picks. I think some interesting, the running back pick at 208, I think is really kind of a fascinating flyer, and even Tommy Eichenberg I kind of like there. So a couple picks I didn't love, but as a whole, again, nailing those top two picks is good. This was a good draft for me. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.